Всем привет! С вами говорит Юра и...
Kato или же Kato.
or Yura.
Hello from Florida.
And I'm all the way over here in New York, and we're just about to launch into paskha. We're like literally, well, I wouldn't say hours away, but it's getting to that at this
It's
point.
countdown. Definitely countdown time, yes.
And some of you may have not done your Kulich and Sirnaya paskha yet. Some of you may have missed your chance to buy it at your church bazaar. So maybe somebody might benefit from what we're saying here.
For future reference, it doesn't matter. Go back next year in 2026, you decide, what did they say? And that's what we want.
That's right. As a matter of fact, Kato, I'm going to really appreciate this video because I know in a year when I'm going to be doing this again, I'm going to need something to reference. And this now gives me something to reference.
No five.
Yes. Just to bring everybody up to speed, in case you missed our last video, Kato gave me a very well thought out recipe for kulich, which I then proceeded to totally massacre. We'll get into that in a minute, but I think let's mention the fact that kulichi are definitely more difficult to do than sirnaya pasta. Would you agree?
Yeah, it's probably more difficult to make even bread. You got a process of it. It has to rise 3 times. Rise 3 times.
Oh, there you go. Symbolism right there.
Yeah.
So, point being that it takes a lot of time to do a kulich in particular. So that pasta also is not something that you could. Well, maybe you could whip it up quicker, thinking that if you have your own farmer's cheese already. But a kulich, it's all about getting that dough right, and you better get it right because it is easy to mess it up. Ask me how I know. If you look at our last video, you'll see exactly what I did. And we're going to break that down for you in just a minute. But first, I want to mention to everybody that you, Kato, have made lots of kulichi and sirnaya pasta over your time, both in a personal context as well as in a professional context. You've been doing this.
While I was living in Russia for 25 years, there were times when restaurateurs, and I got specifically named specific names, but they would ask me, "Покажи," or please show our chefs, bakers, how to properly make sirnaya paskha, or how you should make kulichi. And of course, I would roll myself into that from a домашнее, because in America, nobody made, in American restaurant, there was no such thing as kulich. So naturally, it was a домашнее experience of how traditionally it was made. And that's what they wanted to show.
And you have to translate that into a professional kitchen, essentially.
I was the aristocratic chef to teach. And they would actually comment that on aristocrat.
There you go. Look at that. Well, it's important to mention that, when you arrived on the scene, especially, this was like something that was not that well known in Russia because of the Soviet period. Many people didn't know how to do it.
It's lost. It was lost. It's taboo. It was lost. Yeah.
Right. So you were right on that wave when people were rediscovering it. Now, of course, if we go on YouTube, we see thousands of recipes for kulichi and for
which are wrong. Which are wrong.
Yeah, we're going to get into that too. I think that's important. And I'll just also emphasize that in Russia today, it's not called sirnaya pasta like we always, our zarubezhniki would always call it, but they call it a tvorozhnaya pasta, which I guess technically is accurate, but we just refer to it always as a sirnaya pasta.
It's a sirnaya pasta, of course.
Right.
And also, Allah Virde, if I could add to this, kulichi back in the 90s they were available during Soviet times, but it was called весенние cakes. Весенние cakes.
Yeah.
Весенние cakes.
And that may be one of the reasons why Russians incorrectly slice it too. We'll get to that as well. But anyway, so let's jump right into the kulich catastrophe that I had in the last video, where I show me making your well thought out family recipe and totally destroying it because I made in my opinion, several critical mistakes, right? The first mistake I made was I used self-rising dough, which I never really used before in my life. I did read on it. I read up on it, and I said, okay, this has baking soda as opposed to, yeast. So I was like, why don't I try doing it? Well, let's experiment a little bit over here, which was a very stupid idea, but I decided to experiment.
It's not stupid. You tried it. You know, there's a Russian выражение. It's called "Первый блин комом." So "Первый Kulich комом." And that's what you did. You tried something. So it's not disastrous. I'm sorry that you had to spend so much extra time in doing it, but okay, so bien comum.
Well, I took a bullet for all of you who are going to try to do this with self-rising dough and using baking soda. Although one person swears that she's able to get it done with baking soda, but
Oh,
I still say,
you can, but then the recipe is different.
yeah,
And
it's Irish soda bread. Basically, what I made was Irish soda bread in a form of a kulich. That's the way I see it.
you made it, and you can understand it was too hard. It was rock hard. So it's not even a Irish soda bread. It was just hard.
It's a compressed version of an Irish soda bread.
Okay, so yeah.
Which cuts very nicely with the sauce. So, point being that yes, that was the other problem, that I overworked the dough, and this is one of my greatest weaknesses. I used the wrong flour. I overworked the dough, and then of course I made the mistake of thinking that allspice is the same thing as five spice, which was a pretty big mistake to make right there. So, anyway, I did make another attempt at it, and I did it properly this time. I used real yeast. I didn't use five spice, but I did still overwork the dough, and that is again a problem. I have to learn how to work the dough properly. And I think when you do it by hand, it's harder to mess up because you feel it much better than when you're using a machine, and that's where I think my problem was. Anyway, so let's just discuss what really makes for a good kulich. I mean, it's all about just making dough essentially that's sweet, and yeah, that's essentially it. It's just baking dough essentially.
The process, it's very heavy. You have to, kulich is not a typical dough. It's not a wonder bread, right? So you got to let it rise several processes, right? At least 3 times. So the because it's very heavy, it's got so much in there, and moving it from one item into another um, uh, into another fixture, right? So you got to let it rise a second time, a third time. So yeah, it's a process.
Exactly. So if we go down by, what you really need, what are the critical components of all of this, right? So we have the flour, not self-rising flour. We have normal flour. Any preferences, anything that stands out as far as a good choice of flour for you?
Um, let's just focus on all-purpose flour. You got to focus. I will admit, there's King Authors, there's Gold Medal, there's Pillsbury, and so on. All these flours available. What is the best flour? Comment the ones that you use, right? But there's actually a King Authors flour which you cannot get, unfortunately, in supermarkets. It's only available at such supermarkets called Restaurant Depot, and that flour is just perfect, perfect. Unfortunately, not everyone's got to do it. So if the churches use King Author's flour for their prosfora, that's the key. I could show you in my kitchen. I still buy the King Author's brand. If it's available in your area, it's available here.
By the way, they're not sponsoring us.
Right. And nice name, actually, right, for King Authors. We definitely use that. And golden medal with the yellow package on there. That's probably the best option you could use. But I've used Pillsbury and I've used Pathmark. I've used everything from back in the day. So it's all doable. It's about taste and consistency.
All right, so let's move from the flour. Obviously, we need yeast, not other things. And I think that what pays to point out that you underlined the fact that always get your yeast fresh, right? Get the packets fresh.
Hold up. Don't mess up here. Fresh meaning the expiration date is not expired. Okay, fresh yeast. You could buy fresh yeast in specific supermarkets that offer a cake yeast, which is alive, but that's a different situation. We're talking about Fleischmann's dry yeast. Make sure the expiration date is correct.
Let
And
me ask, in Russia, there's also this whole idea of сухие дрожжи and свежие дрожжи.
that's what
What's
I'm
that?
saying about. Yes, that's exactly what I'm talking about. Fresh yeast compared to sухие дрожжи. So majority in America, like 90%, are going to use dry yeast, and they're Fleischmann's. I don't know how to pronounce it actually, but
Right.
that's what you want to use
I
because
understand.
it's
Okay.
readily available.
Okay. Very good point. All right. So, because there's a difference if you use one or the other in terms of how much you have to actually add into a recipe, from what I remember.
A real fresh yeast, which is a cake, it's a baker's yeast. The proportions are different, and it's actually very good if you could use it, but don't, in our case, don't use it because majority of people don't have access to it.
Right. So your recipe has a starter. That's the way to, kick
Right.
yeast into action, right?
Uh,
And I don't even think it's a question so much of proofing it per se, because the assumption is if you get it with the proper expiration date. And again, I just go to the store and buy it. It's so cheap. It's $2 or $3. I figure why take a chance that your yeast is not going to be active, right? So I always get it fresh. The few things I do know about making dough, always use good yeast. So
if I could elaborate there for a second, because you buy yeast and you put it in the refrigerator thinking, and next year it comes out. I've done that twice. I've done that at least twice in my lifetime. I had that yeast in there. No, 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 no. Trust me. And Nikolai Samsidis will vouch to this. Okay, he will vouch to this, where he says we did a serious mistake by using old yeast.
absolutely, because that could just throw all your work out the window, essentially. Yeah. Which is, again, that's why it's always a good idea to proof it anyway, but we're not even trying to do that. We're just trying to give the yeast a head start with some sugar, get it moving. All right, so let's move on to the next point. Eggs. We're using both parts of the egg. We're using the egg yolks and we're using the egg whites. Well, some people are going to say the egg yolks are about the color. What would you say to that?
Exactly. Pasteurized, you have free range and so on, all these types of eggs available today. Back in the day, it was simple. They were eggs and that's it, right? Jumbo, large, small, whatever. That was the only options we had. Today we have a variety, right? So, and in 2025, with the problems of eggs available at the price that you want to pay for it, right? We had an issue here in 2025. So people looking back at this video in 2040, they'll say, "What are you talking about?" So there was a chicken problem here, virus. If you could make sure that the yolks are yellow, it's very important. And how is it done? Not chemically. That's not the best. Try to get real good eggs that were free. They feed on grains and grass and so on. How do you do that? Well, that's very difficult. Just mass-produced eggs are difficult because there will probably be a wider shade of yellow.
Interesting. So you basically, the only way to really do that is to sample different, eggs.
If you have a chicken coop at home, or someone has it, right? Go for those eggs.
Okay, so that's a good bet. So you just kind of go to the farmer's market for that sort of thing, I guess.
If you
That's
could get
if
that.
you want to be a perfectionist, of
Yeah,
course.
it'll
Right.
be perfectly yellow for that purpose, and it makes your kulich that much more yellow. Yeah.
Okay, good point. Very good point. All right. Well, so we have both egg yolks and the whites. What, in your opinion, is there like what's the point of having eggs
Sure.
in general in your kulich?
Sure. The yolks in this case, your the color is one thing, but it's also good for the creamier texture of the kulich. How do you get creamier? Well, it does because uh, the whites of the eggs is to give it form. It helps rise the kulich, the bread itself, right? Uh, um, you just have to understand these are two different parts. Uh, it's a chicken in reality, right? If you think about it, right? But The yolks are for the color and the cream touch to the kulich, and the whites are for when you beat the whites. It's for to give it more rise of the dough.
Okay. Okay. Very good. So essentially, exactly. That's why you beat them before you put them in. Okay.
Yeah.
Good point. Sugar. I mean, sugar seems like a no-brainer, just white sugar. But as we discussed, there was people who like brown. There's people who like vanilla sugar. So what's up with that?
And there's also stevia.
Monk fruit. We got to do a monk fruit Quidditch one day.
Right. Honey. You could also use honey. So yeah, as long as you got sugar, that's the most important point. If you got brown sugar, some people prefer using brown sugar because it's more tropical.
A tropical Quidditch.
Or because it's got this more, it's organic per se. So in reality, any sugar is fine. Um, I use regular normal sugar. If you want to use brown sugar, does it give more taste? You know, I'll add to this. My roots come from northern Ukraine, on one side of my family, and it comes from Malorossiya. Uh, Malorossiya, it doesn't exist today, but they cultivated. Their business was they had 3 sugar factories, and they made sugar from beets.
Wow.
Okay, that was their business. So that's from one side of my family. Look, you can use any sugar you want. Pure cane sugar, beet sugar, doesn't matter. Organic sugar. The idea is to have it sweet. That's the most important thing.
And to get those calories up as high as possible. Okay, so speaking of that, we have butter next on the list. So, any comments about butter?
Well, you got to use not salted butter, sweet butter. Trust the butter that you use. Don't get into margarine. Okay, understand what margarine is. Okay, it's very important here because people actually they don't want to eat butter because it's fattening. What is margarine? What, not fattening? So I've heard people use margarine, and people stand behind. Use butter if you could get farmers market. If you have some farmers next door, you get that butter because it gives that rich taste. I saw the brand you were using, Kerrygold from Ireland and so on. Yeah, look, just use a butter that you could trust. Breakstones, I used to use Breakstones all the time before.
Right. Yeah. Okay.
Mass
All right.
produced.
So, and then I think another absolutely necessary component to Quidditch is obviously raisins. Right. You can't have a Quidditch without raisins.
It's those, yeah. But the question is, wait a second. Question is, dark raisins or golden raisins?
I mean, golden raisins give the whole look of the Quidditch more brightness, which I think some people find appealing.
Yes, and there are certain people that want to have golden raisins. I'd rather have those black spots in there. I don't want to have white spots. I want to have black spots. And there's a story behind that because Filipski хлеб, который был известный, I mean, it was known in Russia. The idea was they got raisins into their bread, and people thought it was to cover up the roaches that were in the bread. And so the story arrives. I don't know if it's true or not, right? But it was called Filipovsky хлеб. Coincidentally, Filipovsky relative lived here in Florida, in Clearwater, Florida, the descendant of the Filipovsky хлеб. But that's beside the point. So yeah, I would say stick to dark raisins. I would definitely suggest that. But you could throw in anything: blueberries, cranberries, raisins, anything you want.
Okay, how would blueberries how would something like blueberries hold over time?
Perfect. It's
Really?
dry. It goes into the dough. It's gonna preserve the wetness of the berry.
That's very interesting. Okay. All right. So then we have things like spices and extracts. And you already mentioned honey. So, what are your thoughts on those things?
I like to add flavor. In my parents' later years, they added all these different types of flavors, and it they all act. You could smell the rose water. You could taste the nutmeg. You could taste the cardamom. You could taste and see it. So it's a matter of almond extract, vanilla beans. There's nothing wrong with adding that. It gives it more life.
What are your feelings about the saffron, given its cost?
Beautiful color, beautiful color. It gives the yellow color. It doesn't give any flavor, minimal flavor. I mean, when you're buying wine, and if you read the label, not that you want to read the label, maybe you want to read the label, but it says it tastes like a strawberry with a little bit of peach. That's exactly about a kulich. You want to have, but you cannot overpower. When you're trying it for the first time, you just got to make that balance. So next year, remember how to do it. That you don't want to overpower the rose water. You don't want to overpower the almond extra, because there's time where you, oh, that tastes great. Now I want more. No, 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 no. You'll make a mistake.
I think it's very important to emphasize that whenever you're doing something just once a year, a recipe, especially something like kulich, which, in my opinion, requires a lot of nuance, right? If you're not regularly baking throughout the year, which I never do, this is a challenge because you have to remember how you did it. You have to take notes. All of our, parents, whoever cooked in our family, they've got their little cards with their little notes and scribbles and modifications and so on. And it's important to reference that. And now that we're doing a video, we can, reference that as well. So these are important concepts for understanding how to make a kulich. And let's also not forget, let's talk about what else we could put outside of like the things you mentioned, right? So there's zucchini, right? What are zucchini, and what are your thoughts on that?
Candied fruit. Oh, I'm not a fanatic of that.
Same
I
here.
didn't grow up with that. But my father was very into it. He loved the zucchini. He would make sure, and it was a very hard item to purchase as well. You would have to buy it in European stores because it was not really readily available. So zucchini, yeah, it's candied fruit. It's candied oranges, limes, whatever you want, and it adds color. Definitely adds color. But when you're biting into kulich, uh, I'll stick to raisins, dried apricot. By the way, do you know what dried apricot is? My father didn't know. There was no name for it before. It was just dried apricot. But do you know what dried apricot is in Russian?
What?
Kuraga.
That's what it is.
Kuraga. And when I traveled back home to visit my parents for Easter, for paskha, and so on, I'm talking about kuraga, and my father's like saying, "А что такое kuraga?" And I go, "Это сухой абрикос."
Yeah. Wow. Interesting. Okay, so last thought. Sliced almonds, some kind of nuts. What do you think about that for kulich?
No, it's not traditional. But I
Yeah.
guess if you're living in an area where it's filled with almonds and no raisins, which I doubt, yeah, you could add it if you want to, right?
So let's briefly discuss the logic of what we're doing when we're making a kulich in the sense of the steps that we're taking. So the first step in your recipe was to combine the sugar and the egg yolk together, right?
And
Before
cream it.
adding flour,
Sure, you're
and then
creaming.
you add flour with the starter. So why did you do it this way?
You're creaming it. You gotta use those products, not flour. You're combining those ingredients together to make it that creamy texture.
And if you had that together with the flour, it would just interfere with that creamy process.
Yeah, you're already making a dough.
Okay, so we want to restrain ourselves from making the dough first.
Sure.
Then we start making the dough,
Sure.
adding all those ingredients. It's an interesting thought. So tell me, I mean, you've made kulich. I don't know. You made it manually from beginning to end, or were you always using a mixer? How did you always do it? How did you knead your dough?
I've done it by hand, and I've done it by with the
Mixer.
mixer tools, using equipment. Sure, and even the training I got, of course, is from my parents, Nisiat Urukami, right? And we used to do, 5 gallon, 5 gallon? No, yeah, 5 gallon drums where we'd, mix and mix and mix. And I remember my parents complaining, they're wiping down their hands and so on, mixing it, mixing and mixing it. So, yeah, the idea is to, what's better? You're using your hands, it's going to take more time. But you feel the dough better.
So there might be a point to doing it manually because there's less of a risk of over kneading it essentially.
We used to make a lot of kulichi. I mean, it was not just 2 or 3 or 4 kulichi. We used to make, I don't know, probably about 20 different kulichi, different sizes, because for Krasnaya Gorka, we would have to have it at every cemetery plot. So we would have a whole bunch of tomato paste size kulichi.
Those are called micro kulichi.
And micro kulichi, right?
And then you have the mega on the other side.
And we would put it on for Krasnaya Gorka, readiness, be at every cemetery plot with a couple of eggs and so on. But we also used to give it to my grandparents, right? We would send it down to Florida because my father's parents, my grandparents lived in Miami, so we would send it to them. We would give it to my mom, grandmothers from my mom's side in New York City, and so on. So we would have a variety of kulichi.
Interesting. Yeah, you can get very creative with that kind of stuff. So, all right. So basically, we're getting to that dough, that proper consistency. We have 3 rises according to your recipe. I've seen 2 more commonly, although I've also seen 3 before. So essentially, first rise is right after you mix everything up, let it rise. Then you come back, you see this big blob, you drop it, you beat it, you do it again, right?
Yeah.
Then this is the interesting part. Just when you're about to put it after you put it into the containers, you give it a little time on its own before you subject it to the heat of the oven.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So this is maximizing the fluffiness, essentially.
You got to give it time to, because from the second, you can't put it in a second into the can right away, because it might end up rising way too much.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Again, questionable. That's why you got these 3 processes, right? That's why you got to make sure. Yes, you gotta. It's the 3 times. Bog любит троицу.
That's right. Very well said. All right, so we've got our kulich finally in the oven, and hopefully it's rising properly. A couple of things we got to think about. First, we got to think about the Kulich can. We got the Kulich can question. So I think everybody knows the coffee cans, right? And they have their pluses and minuses. Then, of course, some people have used the paper Quaker Oats cans.
That's recent. That's more recent. And let me add to it. Something that became, people had money, they would buy glass beakers. So glass beakers were very, because it's tempered glass, it could withstand high temperatures.
Pyrex.
Yeah, Pyrex and so on. So, but yeah, Pyrex doesn't produce scientific glass beakers, but it's readily available. And the church that I go to, they used to, in recent times, they switch to glass beakers.
Interesting point. Never thought about that. But here's what I used. I used the aluminum ducts that you can get at Home Depot, and I'm going to preface this with the warning that if you're going to take the route of the aluminum duct, the piece of 3-inch aluminum duct tubing, first of all, don't cut yourself, because when you're cutting it down to size, you could really slice your fingers really nicely, and when you're even handling it. The second thing I'm going to warn people about is that you definitely have to bake it in the oven at baking temperature for at least an hour without the kulich in it, just to bake away the chemical coatings that they do at the factory there, so they don't interfere with your kulich.
Absolutely. Very important.
Right? Which is why you don't want to use it in the first place, from what I understand, right?
Yeah, it's not just aluminum coating from Home Depot and so on. It's, if you're using because everything today is printed on cans and so on. Don't use printed stuff on cans. Back in the day, coffee, tin cans came with a label that's wrapped around, glued on it. You got to cinch that, and you got to burn it's all chemical. We
All right,
understand.
so you think that the fumes from the paint on the outside of the can are
Yes,
already a problem?
absolutely. You don't. What is that? What's printed on the can?
I
So
understand. Okay, that's an interesting point. All right. See, what I like about the aluminum ducts is you can just punch that coulis straight out. It comes right out with no trouble. That's what I personally like about it. But I can understand your concern about, some other elements interfering potentially, even if you've baked them off. But I get it. I mean, everyone has their feelings about that.
back in the day, everything there was nothing printed on cans. Nothing. It was all paper. You have to understand that, and cutting the tops off and the lips and so on. So today, a lot of it's printed because technology improved and they made it easier. Not for kulichi makers, right? They're making it easier for themselves to print everything on a can. So.
Okay. So we've got our coulis in the oven. How do we know it's ready? It's not like we can stick a meat thermometer in there, right? What's the classic tried and true technique?
Well, you got to look at it how it's rising right inside the oven. And if you see it, it's rising, great. If it's not, you're worried already. But the point is, how do you test it? And you got to have a long cotton swab stick, a long toothpick, a long bamboo skewer, anything wooden where you could stick inside the middle. You see that it's starting to change color while you're baking, right? The top, the verhushka, the shapachka of the kulich, right?
Shoppage.
Shapachka. It was a shapachka, yeah. And you put that long wooden piece inside or bamboo, and you take it out and you see if it's wet. You could actually see it's wet. Uh, it's not ready. You might have to reduce the temperature because you look at it's turning dark already. So you got to reduce the temperature at that point. But yeah, you got when you see the stick that it's dry, that there's no wetness to it, that's ready.
So the trick, of course, is to use something that's made of wood, not made of metal. Like I use a
No,
shashlik
you
skewer.
can't see. You can't see you can't
All
see.
right, interesting point. Interesting point. All right, so now we've got our kulich ready. It's out of the oven. It's cooled off. We popped it out of the can, which, by the way, according to your instructions, should always have parchment paper around it, and not only parchment paper, but smeared with butter and breadcrumbs as well to make for an easy exit for our kulich, right?
Absolutely.
Right? We get it out there, and we don't take it out until it's cooled. Correct?
It's got to cool down because you don't know the reaction. If you take it out and unfold everything, there's liable. It's going to fall apart. You got to let it cool.
I understand.
Put
Good
it on
point.
padushka, put it
That's
on a towel, put it on a diala, and anything where it sits for a while. Let it cool. Any bread, the same thing.
okay. So we don't want to overhandle it while it's still hot.
Hot.
Okay. All right. So we've got our kulich. It's cooled. It's exited. It's made a successful exit. And now we have the issue of the shapashka, because traditionally we have glazur, which is basically just a lot of sugar condensed in a condensed liquidy form that goes on top. And from what I understand, there's two ways of doing the glazur. You could either do confectioner sugar with egg white or confectioner sugar with lemon juice. Talk to me about that.
Yeah. Uh, Egg white is going to be, it's not preferred. The idea that people didn't understand what to do, I use the egg yolks. Now, what do I do with the egg whites? So you could beat that and try to cover it, but it's going to be soft. And if you got high humidity, it's going to stay wet. It takes a while for it to dry up. So uh, you could use cream of tartar in the recipe then with egg whites. You're going to have to use cream of tartar to stiffen it a little bit. Okay. No, you could use lemon juice and confectioned powdered sugar, and that's perfectly fine because it's got that nice little sweetness to it, and you don't need that much. You just need a squeeze of a half a lemon to do the glazur.
And it's just a lot of beating so that you get that consistency. That's what the hard part is.
You're not, it's really mixing already a powdered sugar, so you don't have to mix it so much.
And if you use regular cane sugar, what's going to happen?
Forget about that. No, you can't use that. You can't. You can't. It's not going to, it's not white. It's not white enough. It's not white enough.
And I can tell you from personal experience, you're absolutely right. Anyway, so, although, by the way, I think there is a life hack that if you run into a problem and you don't have confectioners, if you take regular, cane sugar and you put it through a coffee grinder, a cleaned coffee grinder.
You're powdering the sugar, exactly.
You're powdering the sugar, right? Okay. All right. Well,
and wait a second, you forgot the third one, third option.
Tell me about the platok. Oh, well, there's the option, of course, of just having.
No. You just said it. You just platok. That's what I wanted to hear.
Talk to me. Talk to me about the platok.
Okay, so someone came up somewhere with the idea of soaking napkins. Okay, so literally a napkin where you soak it into the glazur. Predominantly, I'm pretty sure it's going to be the powdered sugar, confectionate sugar with the lemon. You soak this napkin, it's got to be strong enough, and then you put it on top of the kulich, and it drapes over the shapichka, the top of the kulich, and it's beautiful. It's beautiful. It really stands out. But that was a fad. I have yet to see anyone, and I tried to teach people in when I was living in Moscow that you could do this as well. It looks beautiful, but it doesn't catch on because it's difficult. Right. It's not edible, and it's not edible. So when you're slicing, which we'll talk about, when you slice a kulich, you got to take the shapichko off, this drapery off in order to cut.
No, it doesn't work for me. That's why I opted for nothing this year, and I'm just going to have a bald kulich.
And that's what people do. So that's a fourth option because a lot of Russians don't get into the glazur. They just sprinkle the powdered sugar if they have it, or they'll just do nothing and put almonds on top and so on. Really, a little egg wash and on top so it sticks to it and so on. Yeah.
Good point about the egg wash, by the way. All right, so we've got our kulich, whether it's got glazur or whether it's bald or got a platok on it. And now it's time to serve your kulich. And this is where you and I have a specific commitment to our zarubezhnaya tradiция of cutting the kulich properly.
Not just zarubezhnaya tradiция, dorevолюционная tradiция, okay?
So we're very closely related after all.
The proper way of slicing a kulich. And we're going to do a specific video in Russian, how to properly slice kulich. Hopefully we'll get through the thousands of people how to properly cut a kulich. And you care to comment, please, пожалуйста, right? S'il vous plaît. You gotta, the way it stands, it's not a cake. You don't slice it this way. You gotta tilt it over and slice it in rounds.
Medallions.
That's the only way.
The medallion method is the only way to cut a kulich.
That's the only way. It was never sliced as a cake. Понятно, весенние cakes threw people off. And when you see that in videos, what are you talking about? Or you see it in real life. And now, I don't know how many times I had to tell people, no. You place it on the side and you slice it. It's not a cake. It's a kulich.
Yeah, that's a very good point. So this is the issue. Like the other thing, by the way, when you're slicing it this way and you're, the long way, what's happening is that you're exposing a lot of more kulich to the air, and you have to wrap it each time so it doesn't harden, right? And when you have the medallion, you just put the medallion on top with a cut bottom, and that's it, and it holds it, and it's fine. So there's even a practical side.
Unless you eat the top off, and as a kid, you want the glazur. So,
right. Well, either way, I think this gets to a very important point. We're going to talk about storing your kulich. And what I really learned from you, one of the many things I learned from you, is the fact that these ingredients are not by accident, because a kulich is actually meant to last for a while, right?
Absolutely. You, so the idea of having all the preservatives in there, right? You got the sugar, you got the salt, you got the butter, you got the egg yolks. It's all there to make it last longer. It's got to stand 40 days because the отмечаешь, you're celebrating Easter, Pascha. It's for 40 days up to Troitsa. So it has to stand that long. So if you don't have all this extra butter and sugar and salt and so on, the kulich is going to go bad after our first week. That's why it's not a bread. It's not a cakes. It's there. It's a kulich. It's got to last that long.
Very good point. As a matter of fact, I can speak from experience. I bought last year. I didn't have time to make my kulichi, so I bought some for my mom, and we put them in the fridge. They were wrapped very well. They lasted almost a year, I would say. It's impressive.
Right. And store-bought kulichi, they're not made that way. They will last a week and они начнут плеснеть or they crumbles or the taste is off. So, yeah.
Great point. Let's now switch gears to our Sirnaya paskha, as we зарубежники call it, not tvorozhnaya paskha. But if you're going to be YouTubing this, you're only going to find stuff under tvorozhnaya paskha, so you're going to have to live with that, unfortunately. So we got basically, if the kulich was all about getting the dough right, Sirnaya paskha is all about getting the cheese right. And one would think that essentially, anytime you combine, in this case, it's farmer's cheese with lots of sugar, with lots of butter, with egg, with cream, and you mix it all together, it can't taste bad. But I think the key trick here is the consistency, which is, I think, what the secret is here, essentially, on many levels. Would you agree?
Yeah. And you said cheese. So what, you're going to add cheddar cheese? You're going to add Swiss cheese, provolone, and so on? No. And this is a question that's been raised many times in various places, but specifically in Russia. А почему называется сырное, а не творожное? Well, because, cottage cheese, it's also called cottage cheese, right? It's not cheese, but it is, because the idea is, what is cheese? You have to understand, you got to make the curds. The idea is to get out of the milk and make it into curds. And that's the basis for any cheese, that curd process. So that's where you get a tvorozhnaya. And in America, of course, we're the best cheese, I will vouch for it. People could argue with this, is farmer's cheese. And it's not readily available, but it is. If you get friendships of farmer's cheese, they're focused on this. It's a farmer's cheese. It's specifically, it comes out kind of like a cottage cheese, but it's not. Right.
So I think we also need to point this out. When I initially when I made my first Sirnaya paskha 7 years ago, I basically just made my own farmer's cheese, which is very easy. Whole milk,
sure,
heat it up, don't get it to get shy of boiling. Dump some white vinegar in there, strain it out, strain
absolutely,
it well.
Yeah.
It's tedious though.
That's exactly it, right? I'm sorry to interrupt. It's tedious work, but it's probably the best option. And if you can find not an ultra pasteurized milk, because ultra pasteurized milk is the only thing we have available, unfortunately, here in the States. And you can't find pasteurized milk. You can only find ultra pasteurized milk. If you could get farm fresh milk, that's great. But if you're into, let me emphasize here, if you could get filtered cow's milk, it'll be best. Unfortunately, you get milk from a cow, and it's going to have that cow taste. And in Russia, you could get that fresh milk, but it's got that cow taste, and that's not what you want.
Interesting point. So you can make your own farmer's cheese if you don't find any. And all depends, I guess, how many Russians you have in your neighborhood, who got to the cheese first. But also an important question about salt, okay? Because friendship comes with no salt added, which is what I always get. and then there's the regular stuff with the salt added. So what's your opinion on this?
Uh, well, if you could get regular farmer's cheese, friendship, it's a perfectly fine cheese. You're gonna still add sugar to it and or add salt to it. It's all about playing with the taste. It's all about
So
playing with
you think it's up to discretion essentially.
that. Da.
Yeah.
It, Sirnaya pasta has to be, it's got to be sweet.
Absolutely. That's the whole point. Otherwise, you're making something totally different. All right. So let's touch upon. There is something that a lady from California told me has been happening on the West Coast. Sometimes they use something called baker's cheese, or it's called quark in Commonwealth countries. What do you think about that?
No, no, don't use baker's cheese. It's first of all, it's not readily available. Let's start that. It might be available in California, might not be available so much here in Florida and so on. It's a specific cheese. Uh, really, farmer's cheese is readily available practically everywhere. And Friendship is a good, the only brand really that focus on it and mass produces it. It's perfectly fine.
Yeah, I've had very good results in friendship. In my case, I prefer the non-salt added stuff, and it works quite well for me.
Yeah.
So, just one more thought: ricotta. I did this and I messed up real bad. So, what do you think?
I've used ricotta. It's a different process of playing with ricotta. I don't like the flavor. Ricotta is only good for Italian cooking, and that's fine. It's not good for mascarpone. You might ask, oh, how about mascarpone? No, 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 no. It's specifically good for cannolis and so on. Great, but it's too dry, and it's too. It's no. Focus on Friendship. Trust me on this. Farmer's cheese, if you could get it, or make your own home cheese at home. Yes, that's it.
Let's also talk about consistency here because you mentioned it, and I think that's one of the biggest differences between a good Sirnaya pasta and a okay, it's sweet and everything sweet tastes good Sirnaya pasta, because I think one of the critical components of this is texture, and that can be done. And when you put your Sirnaya pasta through the meat processor, that's one way of getting the texture right and doing it always twice.
Not meat processor, meat grinder, right?
Grinder. Sorry, I know the difference. Okay, but putting your farmer's cheese through a meat grinder twice always, not just once. Don't be lazy. Or my preferred method, not that I prefer doing this because it's more labor intensive, but I think it definitely pays off, is to readiness. You get one of those aluminum, whatever they're called. I forgot what they're called in English, but it's a sitza.
There's a sieve where you put right. So you put the cheese through a sieve, and it goes through this whole small little mini holes, and you're just cranking it. The same idea with the meat grinder, right? Rochai, you're putting it, and you would have to do it twice. My father was 100% behind this. He didn't use anything electronic. He would put the cheese, the farmer's cheese, put it in through twice. It's very important because you don't want to have the krupinki. You don't want to have the small little, when you bite into a Sirnaya pasta, you don't want to feel that all of a sudden those little cheese curds that's left over. And you're trying to, and today's technology permits, so you got ninjas, which are very popular in the stores, right? You puree the cheese, or puree whatever. Just keep on pureeing it. It's very good. Perfect thing.
Now we're going to get to our next point, which might be a bit controversial. Just as with the cheesecake, you have the bake and the no bake version, you have the same essential concept with Sirnaya pasta. And in Russia these days, the most common recipes you see online, including the recipes that I use, are the zavarnaya Sirnaya pasta, right? So in other words, what you do there in a zavarnaya Sirnaya pasta is you combine all of the ingredients together, right? You got your eggs, your butter, your sugar, your farmer's cheese, your extracts, all that stuff, right? And then, but we don't put the you don't put the vanilla bean in yet. You get it, you heat it up just shy of boiling. It gets liquidy. Then you put it into you put the castrulla into an ice bath, and then you mix and mix and mix. Get it to just bear with me here. I'll explain for the uninformed. get it down in temperature. It becomes thick again. Put it in the fridge. It gets thicker again. Then you put it into the formachka with the marlia, and then you let it drain. That's the zavarnaya method. Now there's the zavarnaya method, which you swear by. So talk to me.
I'm all itchy already. Just by listening to it, I become itchy to this, right? Look, the reason for zavarnaya is for people who are politically correct or incorrect. I'm not going to say, right? Uh, you're red or you're blue. You don't need to go this way. People are too conscious about the yolks. How could I use raw yolks and raw eggs in a recipe? And look, people in the past, and picture 100 years ago. Yeah, granted, 100 years ago is 100 years ago. Today, technology has superseded, and there's mistakes with that because we've heard of recalling beef and recalling chicken and recalling possibly eggs because there's some contaminant. The use of egg yolks is probably very important to keep. The reason why it's used because you can make that cream texture of egg yolks, with the sugar and so on. I can't picture my babushka making sirne pascha with boiled egg yolks. There's no call for it. People used to eat egg yolks in various formats. They used to drink eggs before. So when people say, well, because it's dangerous because salmonella poisoning, no. Yes, but in reality, no.
Don't sue us, please.
Salmonella poisoning is from, you have to understand the egg. Salmonella is outside the egg. It's not inside the egg. So when a chick is infected with salmonella, it's the outside. It's not the inside.
Okay,
Okay.
good. So that means that's also comes down to how you break your eggs open too when you're doing
Or
it.
how you buy the eggs, sure, and you hoping that it's a safe egg. I agree. So there's nothing wrong about using fresh egg yolks, and I prefer using fresh egg yolks. So no zavarnaya in my sense because it kills the taste. You want to have a fabulous taste to a sirne pascha. There's nothing wrong with that.
Interesting opinion. Okay, that's good
You
to.
will get sick. You will get sick from eating parasites from eating sushi more so than you'll get salmonella. How many times do you hear people getting sick from salmonella?
Don't know. Hopefully I never find out. All right, let's move on then. So we've got our butter, we've got our sugar, including in Russia, more commonly, that's where they want you to add the vanilla component. It's vanilny sakhar, right? That's what they always talk about over there. Here we have easy access to vanilla extract as well as vanilla beans, so we don't have that problem.
Well,
And
vanilla beans you won't find. I'm sorry, I got to correct you. You won't find vanilla beans everywhere. You will find vanilla extract, pure imitation, whatever, which is perfectly fine. You want to flavor it, so they all work great. But vanilla beans, you're leaving the specks in the batter in the pascha, and something that you because of you when I saw that video when you were making and that the simply whatever organic or whatever it was called, right? And I bought that because of you.
the bean
Uh,
paste.
yeah, the vanilla paste, right? It looks strange because I've never used it. However, it's sitting in my fridge. I've used it. I have yet to open up the cinnamon pasta to see if I'm going to see the vanilla beans in there or not. Um, it's great to see the specks in the Sirnaya pasta. It's great to see it, the taste and the aroma. It's very important. So this is my experiment for the first time.
Oh, be interesting. I'm very happy with it. This is my second time using it, so it's done the job for me instead of scraping those vanilla beans. And by the way, I just wanted to mention too, a family friend of ours told me that she and you've confirmed this. One thing they do with these vanilla beans once they're already dried up is they will chop them up really fine and throw that in there as well for the little black speck effect because it still has that taste of vanilla in it.
Yeah, you have to understand vanilla beans, the long pods, probably the best way of explaining it. The long pods, if you get them, they were expensive, always expensive, and instead of throwing it away, use it for something. So, for example, my father would definitely not throw anything away. It's not that we're penny pinching, but he would actually slice it up in so many times. I've done the same thing. I would save that that pod, that vanilla bean pod, and slice it up almost to the point of where you would see specks, but when you bite into it, it's a problem. So if you're using those vanilla bean pods, just stick it in your vodka. You have a bottle of vodka, put it in there. Это будет your nastoyka. Okay? And it's a great tasting vodka. Trust me on that.
We'll have to try. We'll revisit that subject later. But so let's just discuss some optional, I mean, possibly optional, I guess, components to your Sirnaya pasta. Some people add sour cream, other people add heavy cream. What are your thoughts on that?
No problem with that at all. You got an old container. It's Lent, Veliki Post, and you got some leftover sour cream that you don't know what to do with it. It's probably going bad. You smell it, taste it. If it's good, put it into the Sirnaya pasta. It won't bother it. You can't overpower the taste, though. Sour cream gives it that sour taste. Heavy cream, same thing. There's nothing wrong about adding heavy cream or light cream or coffee cream, whatever you want in there. It's perfectly fine. Oat cream in recent years, it's not going to do much. Really, it doesn't give anything. It just gives an extra value flavor. Cream cheese. People have put Philadelphia cream cheese, which is similar to a farmer's cheese, right? There's nothing wrong. If you want to make it more flavorful or just more объемность, filling, add to it. Not Swiss cheese, not cheddar cheese. You can be creative, but I would not suggest.
Good point. Now, speaking of getting creative, okay, so we definitely got the raisins involved in this. All right, that's a must. There's no Sirnaya pasta without raisins. I just put some almonds in mine. I was quite happy with that. Sliced almonds, of course, finely sliced almonds. Other things. What are your thoughts on nuts? What are your thoughts on sucate in this? What are you saying?
If you want something beautiful in there to give it a little bit more color inside while you're eating the Sirnaya pasta, go for it. You don't have to. Okay, that's just it. You don't have to. If you want to make it beautiful, go for it. Go crazy.
You could include the Nutella spins and all this other stuff.
I've seen those Russians are being so creative, and I'll give it to them. Let them be creative. But when they're putting the Nutella or the chocolate cover on a Sirnaya pasta, I'm sorry to say it doesn't taste great. But the reasons why they like it is because during Soviet times they had tvorozhnaya, these things that you buy in supermarkets. To this day, you buy a tvorog covered with chocolate. I don't like it. Russians love it.
Yeah.
Okay. So if you want to cover it, but the problem is there's some videos where they're showing that they're putting this Nutella, microwave Nutella on top of a Kulich, Sirnaya paskha, and you see the oozing of the chocolate over the crest, over the HV. I'm sorry, that's wrong.
Good point. Now let's talk about the pasochnitsa, the formachka, right? So we get our Sirnaya pasta mixed up. We incorporate all of the ingredients. If you're if you're somebody like me with my silly prejudices about eggs, which I don't know, whatever, maybe time to revisit that. But you're gonna bring it to heat, and then you're gonna take cool it down and take it out of the fridge. If you're like you're gonna just incorporate those ingredients and put it straight into the formachka with some marli on it. We've got our classic piramida, right? That's the way to do the Sirnaya pasta, right?
Yeah, if it's possible, you get your hands on a pyramid form, and it always used to be wood, if not always was wood. But where do you get wooden forms, pyramids? And the problem matters where you're located. Sometimes these wooden forms, if you don't dry it well after use, it gets moldy, and you get the smell of butter. So, or if you start washing with soap, which you shouldn't, you got to know how to use these wooden forms. Granted, in the 1990s, they started producing plastic forms and readily available. There's nothing wrong with it, but it's plastic. If you want to use it, go for it. I'm using it. But wooden forms, it was used to be made out of birch wood, and it gives that extra taste of birch.
Interesting. Wow.
Okay. So they won't make it. If they make it out of any other type of wood, there's pluses and minuses to it, but preferred is made out of birch. So if you buy a Russian wooden form, most likely it's made out of birch. It's not going to be made out of pine.
And if you deign to make your own, don't use pressure treated wood.
My parents bought an aluminum form back in the 60s, and it's aluminum. You shouldn't be using aluminum, but actually, milk, dairy products with aluminum is perfectly fine. If you're using a tomato product, it's not good. Yeah, I'm using plastic and not using wood this year.
Interesting question now about the final point here is the model, right? So the classic thing is cheesecloth. I think it does work very well. My problem is I always forget to get cheesecloth in advance, and it's not something I can easily get in a supermarket here. So I have an old kind of a loose model that I've been using and abusing, and it's probably hardly anything left of it. And then I put some paper towels on the outside. It worked, but unfortunately, as you can see here, it basically decimated part of my Sirnaya paskha. So I think it speaks to the fact that
Always going to be
delicate.
It's always going to be an issue about modlia. So first time you do it, you understand that you might. The second year you're going to do it, you understand you might be getting into that. So when you're putting the cheesecloth, the modlia, which is called in Russian, you just going to put your one hand in there and reposition all the folds. So when you want to have the chava or the cross visible, you just got to push away the folds into the corners. That's the only way you're going to do it.
And I think an important point is to always put a weight on top.
That's on top of once you've done that. Sure. If you could get the weights. Now, a lot of people know what is a weight. Before you put it in a fridge, or if you're in the northern states, northern countries, you could put it in a garage and let it stand in the garage for a couple of days before you put it in a refrigerator. And the reason why, because if you put it in a refrigerator right away, it fridges up. It becomes too solid for the oils to leave. The idea, the oil and the water to leave the tvorog, the cheese, or the farmer's cheese. You want it to seep. You want it to the liquids to escape. That's the idea, to solidify. So if you put it too early in the fridge, chances are when you're going to take apart the pyramid, the form is going to flop. So if you put it in a garage before you put it in a fridge per se, or you just let it stand in the kitchen for a couple of hours, you want those liquids to escape.
That's a good point. I think that, yeah, I mean, this is always tricky because, and I'll tell you one thing. One of our listeners actually had called me about his Sirnaya paskha, and I actually advised him. He felt it was that he ended up with something that was too liquid. He hadn't yet poured it into the forma, but he was really concerned. And I advised him to actually do the zavarnaya method, which was for one very specific reason. It's the same principle of reducing something, right? Whenever you're boiling something, you're trying to reduce. I felt that might have helped him out. And he tells me that everything seems to have worked after he did that. So in case you're running into a problem of a very liquidy Sirnaya paskha and you're not comfortable with the way it's going, I have actually rescued one of mine by using the zavarnaya method, just getting it to that near boiling point, and then getting it cool again. And that, in my experience, has actually helped me, especially when I tried my ricotta disaster. That's when I was able to bail myself out. And even then, with ricotta, it still didn't hold too well. But anyway, just a pointer in case anybody runs into that kind of a problem.
If you decide to make the Sirnaya paskha, if you're trying to make the Easter cheese cake, if I could properly say so. Make it. It's not that difficult. We're covering a lot about it. We're just covering the pluses and the minuses, the mistakes you're going to be able to make, the kulichi. Look, we're saving traditions. That's the idea of this video podcast. We're trying to save the idea of how to make a kulich. It might be difficult, but if you want to keep the traditions alive, make this cheese. Make this farmer's cheese. Trust me, it's simple enough. It's not so difficult. We'll probably include the recipe. We'll share it with. I'll be happy to share it with you. It's not that difficult. Do it.
Absolutely. And since you're probably going to be watching this already after Easter, you're probably going to still need to make it because, especially Sirnaya pasta, it doesn't last very long, does it?
Oh, it's gone. It could be gone in a day's time. If you have people coming over and celebrating Easter, Pascha, right? It could be gone in the next week. It's not going to stand for 40 days.
Absolutely. Good point.
There's a point that we kind of overlooked, right? So, how did we eat kulichi and Sirnaya Pascha? It goes together. You could eat it out of a dish and have a slice of kulich and eat the Sirnaya Pascha separate. No. You take the Sirnaya Pascha, you put it on a piece of kulich and devour it.
Oh yes, totally, absolutely, and that's the only way I've ever done it.
Right.
So, with that said, the last question and the most scary one to ask is, how many calories does this all have?
Well, we talk about having diets after Christmas and so on. And look, don't count the calories in this. All right. We are indulging after 40 days of fasting, right? Lent. So there's nothing wrong. You've lost weight already, right? We all have been lenting. So there's nothing wrong with adding a little bit extra weight if necessary. This is Easter, Pascha. There's a reason for it, okay? Indulge yourself, enjoy it, and then consider about going on a Weight Watchers diet.
Run it off in the summertime. That's what I say.
Perfect.
Everybody, thank you very much for listening. Thank you for all of the people that have liked and subscribed, and just even for watching our content. We're really grateful for all of those views. It really helps us build this channel. We really want to do a lot of great things. And the more you watch us, the more you comment, like, subscribe, the more traffic we have, the more people we can talk to.
The more you share, please share with your folks, sisters, brothers, aunts, uncles. Look, there's a few of you doing this, and we're getting a very interesting reaction. And we don't want to be boring. We want to have an interesting thing of how we are preserving the Russian heritage, Ruski Zarubezhye in this case, the Russian diaspora, of how we used to make these things, and history and recipes. And Yura, you agree, right? We're going to cover how Razgovlenia, right? How did we celebrate Easter and Pascha, be Christmas or whatever? But it was an important event. This was probably the most important holiday or holy day in our Orthodox tradition, and we'll emphasize that in the process. So share your comments, email us, text us, however you got this. Share with us because we're interested. Is there something we missed? Go for it. Share it with us.
Thank you, everybody, once again. And since you're probably going to watch this right after Pascha, just wanted to wish everybody a Christos Воскресе.
Воистину воскресе 3 times. HV, social media, however you please. Christos Воскресе.
Воистину Воскресе.